Hi, Misha here, and doing another Star Wars ship video. We're looking at a craft that was in the universe since the beginning, the time of the X-Wing, the original TIE Fighter, the Y-Wing, which was of course in Star Wars 1977, later Episode 4, A New Hope. And on top of that, in universe, it served during the Clone Wars, at least a version of it, during the Civil War or the Rebellion, and into the Resistance era. Yeah, the BTL Y-Wing by Corsair Manufacturing. Kind of interesting craft, both in the real world and in universe, so we'll look at all these versions. The first two are little diecast models from the Titanium series, and the last one is another diecast, this time from the Hot Wheels series. So with that, let's look at the earliest one chronologically. The BTL-B Y-Wing, Heavy Assault Starfighter, or Light Bomber. It's about 23.5 meters long and roughly 8.5 meters wide. It had a top speed in atmosphere of about 950 kph, and it had a crew of 2. You had a pilot and main bomber, and you had a gunner in the back, weapons officer, spotter essentially, to kind of pick up the slack, and finally the third member of the crew, an astromech droid, to control the jump computer, do calculations, what have you. Now this craft was very advanced. Work began shortly before the Battle of Geonosis, the battle that started the Clone Wars. But during that battle, the Y-Wing was not ready yet at Corsair. Prototypes were just starting to be made and tested. But it was about 6 months after that Anakin Skywalker kind of scraped together 10 or 12 of these to make a squadron. They were prototypes. In fact, this is what this model purports to be, is replica of the one he flew in the Clone Wars. And that was to attack and destroy the separatist ship Malevolence, which had been rather harmful to Republic forces. So why did he want the Y-Wing? Well, early in the war, the Republic had nothing like it. Their main starfighter was the V-19 Torrent, which I've covered in a different video, which was a relatively light and short-range fighter. Had a couple of lasers and some concussion missiles. They also had the Z-95 Headhunter, which was a little bit more capable, a little bit heavier lasers, and it could carry concussion missiles or a couple of proton torpedoes. But they needed something more, and that's where our good old Y-Wing comes in. Unlike most fighters of the day, it had a hyperdrive, class 2, so quite fast for that time. And again, the astromech did the calculations. It had shielding, which some fighters did, some didn't. It also had quite a bit of armor plating. But it was slow and not terribly maneuverable. The trade-off, it had 2 medium laser cannons in the front, and it had 2 light ion cannons and a flexible 360-degree bubble turret in the rear there that could pretty much fire any which direction. But that was basically for defense. Its main thing were its 2 ordnance launchers. These could carry up to 6 proton torpedoes each, or other ordnance, if fitted, 8 concussion missiles or bombs, rockets. It could also carry proton bombs, which would fall out the bottom as opposed to going out. It had long-range sensors, scanners, also short-range targeting and threat analysis sensors, and a full targeting suite. So it was pretty advanced technologically. So what it didn't have in maneuverability, it made up for in just being loaded. And for early in the Clone Wars, that was pretty good. It was just fast enough and just maneuverable enough to not be hit by the ion cannons from the Malevolence, but it packed enough oomph to take it down. It could take down a capital ship, especially a flight of these. So after that success, 2 more squadrons were quickly created by 21 BBY. But in the beginning, demand was high, but production, because these kind of were rushed in a little fast, was a little bit low. Nevertheless, it became quite the star of the Clone Wars, at least until slightly better fighters and bombers could come along. For example, late in the war, the V-Wing and the ARC 170. Nevertheless, the Y-Wing kind of split the difference in a lot of good ways, and earned a very good reputation. And Consair, since it was quite successful in that war, expected quite a few contracts, so it was ready for full production. Unfortunately, around 18 BBY, the Empire canceled future contracts and then very shortly retired the existing Y-Wings in the former Republic fleet. So that meant a lot of these ended up going to planetary defense systems, outer rim defense networks, or simply being sent to scrapyards to be scrapped, which is what happens at scrapyards, scrapping. Why did they not like it in the Empire? Well, the hyperdrive, the fact that it had a 2-person crew, and because it was 23.5 meters long, it would take up quite a bit of hangar space. It didn't really fit the new Imperial doctrine along with the new Imperial class Star Destroyer. But Consair wasn't about to give up, and that was only the beginning of the Y-Wing's career. The BTL A4 Y-Wing, also by Consair, and very similar in a lot of ways to the B. Towards the end of the Clone Wars, Consair was working on kind of a second generation. They would continue the 2-seat in the S3 series, but then they would go to a single seat in the A4. But like I said, the Empire was not interested. But planetary defense, police, patrol agencies, especially on the Outer Rim, were. And while a lot of Bs were scrapped by the Empire, a lot of the A4s, because they came later, were not. Now, this uses the same twin ion jet engines, 2 engines here, made by Consair. It also has the same kind of fuel cell and reactor system as the other. But it has a few notable improvements. For one, it has a Class 1 hyperdrive. And it had a different type of turret that could be either manually locked forward or sometimes in the rear position, or it could be rotated. I like to think maybe the astromech did, but that meant they didn't have to have a second person in the back. For the A4, just the pilot and the astromech. Now this is the Rebel version, and early on in the Rebellion, this was kind of their primary fighter because they could get it, and it was a good fighter for the most part. But the speed and all that, they did what they could. They stripped down a lot of components, especially back here, and they shortened the engine nacelles from this Like I said, this is 23.5 meters long. This is down to only 16.25 meters long. Still quite long, but you know, they kind of removed a lot of the unnecessary exhaust and kind of paneling and stuff behind here in the cockpit. And they were able to squeeze it up to about 1,000 kph in atmosphere and get a little more maneuverability. So a little more speed at the cost of some armor. To make up for that, though, they would kind of do some interesting updates and upgrades to these on a more individual basis. In the real world, this was kind of said to be a chopped and customized hot rod. Now, they would often divert energy from the shielding to the engines to give a little extra boost, trying to use speed as a defensive mechanism. And they, you know, they do have a slightly heavier ion cannon setup here. Now, again, to save weight, typically, instead of loading up with 6 proton torpedoes each, they would only do 4 per launcher, for a total of 8. And the Rebels got pretty creative. These could have limpet mines, cluster missiles, mines of other types, mag pulse warheads. They were a little more versatile because they had to be. And while they were maintenance heavy, they were also reliable in space. Pilots were, you know, kind of confident in them. Old and tested. Little bit of a bitch to work on the ground, but you know how it goes. A couple of years before, say around 3 or 2 BBY, this was definitely the main assault starfighter of the Rebellion, helping to do hit and run thanks to its Class 1 hyperdrive. Again, there would be the S3 variant, which is a 2-seater. The second person would be kind of a weapons officer, observer, what have you. In 0 BBY, at the Battle of Scarif, Y-Wings of Gold Squadron would be instrumental in blowing up the shield gate, letting the plans and all that Rogue One stuff happen. And that explains why Gold Squadron was at kind of low strength at Endor. There was about 8 flying at the time. Red Squadron was also another famous user around the same time of the Y-Wing. And they did experience heavy losses before and around the Battle of Yavin. But again, part of it was because this was before the X-Wing was really coming online. So if it's your primary fighter, yeah, it's going to have heavy losses. Kind of reminds me of the P-40 a little bit. Maybe the P-47, but yeah. Of course, at Yavin, out of the 8, only 1 survived, and so there were plans to make a replacement for this, which would become the B-Wing, although the B-Wing had some delays and was a little difficult to train pilots on, and even more maintenance intensive than the Y-Wing here. So these were still very much in service in 4 ABY at Endor with Gray Squadron, and were still very much in service in 5 ABY at the Battle of Jakku. After that, once the New Republic was established and treaties and disarmament were, assigned, many Y-Wings were put into the mothball fleet, kind of standby, or were assigned to patrol duties because they have good sensors, or planetary defense systems. So they continued on, even though the Rebellion pretty much got all of theirs secondhand. They either bought them from planetary defense, or just kind of stole them from junkyards. So, yeah, kind of secondhand ships, and that's kind of the look they were going for with all the exposed paneling and whatnot. I have the D'Agostini model, and these are actually hollow as they should be. On these diecast, they're just blackened. Kind of wish they were silver, or not silver, but, clear there, but oh well. So that's the stripped down version, and again, this was in universe before the X-Wing, and in the real world, designed around the same time. Here's the version again where it has its full armor plating. But I think while the X-Wing was kind of the hero ship, so they were limited, this one was secondary, so the designers were allowed to have a little more fun with it, and they actually seemed like they liked it. Now, originally, the Y-Wing was to have a bubble turret, like on this one. But when they tried to put it on a blue screen back in 1976, 77, it didn't film well. So that's why they replaced the smaller, more delicate looking bubble turret with this larger, pivoting gun system, which makes sense if you're just going to have a single person assault fighter. But yeah, they continued on even after the establishment of the New Republic. In fact, Consair, at least a version of it, decided to start up the line again. The BTA NR2 Y-Wing, I presume NR stands for New Republic. And with the establishment of the New Republic, or just the reestablishment of the Republic, Consair was reestablished as Consolidated Consair Limited. So, kind of a different company, but the same. Why did they restart the Y-Wing series? Well, the lore is because it was so famous and so widespread during the rebellion, and because it was a tested design. Why not? But they of course did upgrade it, although mostly it's internal. And they kind of fused the Clone Wars with the Rebel version. It has kind of the spindly panel look of the Rebel, but like the nacelle struts or the wings are much thicker and further forward. And it has kind of intermediate length. This is just under 18.2 meters long, so right between the two. And it's a little bit wider than previous versions because of these new nacelles. It's about 8.75 meters wide. Now it still only has a one person in the cockpit. It can have an astromech or not. And it does have a turret, kind of a return to the ball style, but it's an improved turret that's more easily controlled by automation, be it the computer, the pilot, or the astromech. It also has more modern, improved, medium laser cannons up front. It has new ion jet engines. These are designed to be faster, more powerful, more reliable, lower maintenance, and so that energy doesn't have to be pulled from the shields to the engines. It had more powerful shielding. It also had modernized, updated sensors, and it had additional fuel cells to power all of this. And originally, these did not have ordnance launchers. So you think, well, before they were heavy assault fighters or light bombers. What good are they? Well, one thing, with the hyperdrive, these also had 1 week's worth of consumables for the crew or crew members. They could also carry a modest amount of cargo, 100, 120 kilograms, which meant these also made for quite good scout, reconnaissance, and patrol craft. And that's what this was originally designed for. It had the lasers and the turret for defense, and also the turret was good because one of the roles the New Republic used this for was as kind of a peacekeeper and an interdictor, to disable, not destroy, Nadu wells. Again, the Clone War were pretty much bombers, assault fighters. During the rebellion, they discovered the Y-Wing was capable of quite a bit more, including a convoy duty, a scout, escort, even a light transport for people, whatever it needed to be, really. Even there's the long probe scouts, kind of a famous version. So that's what they were more angling for, a long range, long endurance craft. And all the changes did give it a little more speed, up to about 1,050 kph in atmosphere, and it did improve maneuverability, and it did have more shielding and more armor, and it did have improved targeting for its weapons, and improved sensors. It also had a revamped, more modernized cockpit and other avionics. So these are used by the New Republic for planetary defense, long patrols, policing, basically. But it was the Resistance who got a hold of some. that kind of refitted them with the launch tubes for ordnance. Typically they would go with 6 proton torpedoes or up to 20 proton bombs. And this was easily done because Conseil designed the BTA NR2 to be kind of modular, customizable for any customer, because it wasn't just targeting the New Republic, it was targeting anyone. So it was pretty easy to add back the launchers, which of course had been part of the design anyway. And so these would once again become an assault fighter light bomber, but now we're 100 kph faster than the initial version, the BTLB, and more maneuverable, more shields, class 1 hyperdrive, improved lasers, so on and so forth. So yeah, this production started up around the time of the Battle of Jakku, around 5 ABY, and was in full swing during the early days of the New Republic. And these were still very much in service up to 35 ABY at the Battle of Exegol. As you can tell, they really did kind of just borrow from both the Clone Wars and the Rebellion Civil War style. You have the bubble turret and the longer engines from the Clone Wars, but then you have the more skeletal frame from the originals here. And thus ends the Y-Wing, at least so far. So what about more real world and the little models, toys, ships themselves? Well, yeah, let's start with kind of a real world perspective. The original Y-Wing, kind of retroactively named the A4 here. Like I said, this was designed to be a chopped and kind of retrofitted hot rod for the original movie, and just to look different than the X-Wing with the 2 engines. And then it continued on through all the films. Pretty iconic ship, sometimes infamous. This is a pretty early titanium. It's, as far as I remember, based on the original plastic Micro Machines mold. It does have some moving components, like the turret up here. The cockpit does not open on most of these. Some of the later production ones, the cockpit does open, but I kind of like that most it doesn't, frankly. It's all metal, even the engines, even the black part. There's very little plastic on this. It's quite heavy. It does have little flip-out gear for landing, which is kind of neat, but also does kind of detract a bit. But yeah, it was designed to be both a model and toy, so what can you do? Little landing pads. Not bad, I suppose. They come down easy, and they lock very well. And these stands they come with are nice. They plug in easy and secure. I always have trouble finding the little spot on this because it's so hidden in all the clutter down here. Of course, it's going to adjust a minute on the camera. There we go. Pops in good. Not hard to do, but not coming off. Pretty neat. So yeah, this is the first one. They did this in the red and the gold, damaged, undamaged. For the Clone Wars, late in the Titanium series, around 2009, they did this version. This is Anakin's. They also did just a standard clone version. Turret is just, I don't think it rotates, it's just too small. It too is mostly metal. Because it is a longer design, it's a little bit more spindly, lighter. It has the fold down gear as well. And the same stand. Hole in one. And again, it holds very well. I think this one's really neat. I was interested to see what it looked like when these were around. And then finally we change brands because I don't think the Black Series, the titanium, is keeping up with the newest movies, because this is from the Rise of Skywalker. These stands have more of a pop. I do like that this has the clear here for the engines. Neat touch. They're pretty well metal too, because these are hollow. You don't feel it as much here, but the body's metal. Turret again is just too small to rotate reliably. This has more visible screw holes, which is pretty common for these, and it does not have fold down landing gear, which I'm okay with. Again, it's an okay feature, but it's also kind of eh. And this stand is a more firm thing, but again, very tight. You can also easily pull it off from the bottom. When I say that, usually they pull them right off. Okay, it's gonna make a liar out of me. Oh well. Normally they just pull off, and you can kind of use that as a little guide if you like. It's neat enough. I actually didn't mean to buy this one. It came in a lot, and I thought it was just the regular Y-Wing, but I'm okay with it. It fits in with the series. So yeah, I really like that they did the Clone Wars version, because it was always said that the Y-Wing was an older craft dating back to the Clone Wars, so it's nice to see it. It is different enough with the longer design and the whole kind of arrowhead shape here and the different turret. I like that they used the original ball style to kind of give that some conicity. So it's different enough to be its own thing, but you can definitely see how this could be chopped, welded, and reworked into this much blockier, chunkier. You can see where that would be missing, and how these struts could have been shortened and then reattached. So what about this version from Rise of Skywalker? As a variant, I like it. It fits in okay. But as an in-universe thing, it's quite lame, which is the problem with pretty much all the Resistance craft, the T-70 X-Wing, their version of the A-Wing, and their Y-Wing here. It's too close to original. They changed too little. With the X-Wing, I can understand, because the X-Wing was a very new and a very capable craft during the Rebellion. Same goes for the A-Wing. But the Y-Wing being such an old design, why would they put it back into production? Especially when they had the B-Wing and other modern craft. I could understand old Y-Wings like this being in the Resistance. Maybe even junkier looking. Why not? But why would a new version made during the New Republic be around? It seems kind of lazy, which is, I think, a good definition for a lot of the stuff. Now, there are some neat designs from the new films. For example, Rogue One and even Solo have some interesting designs, but the main ones, with a few exceptions, are just kind of eh. And I want to say it, of the 3 sequel films, just on terms of design of craft, I'm going to have to give it to The Last Jedi. It at least has a few new things, like the TIE Silencer, which is a neat design. It's still reminiscent, but okay. And the Resistance Bomber. Again, kind of reminds you of a Corellian, but it's different. You look at the first and the last film and the sequel, and they just reuse existing designs, maybe changing 10-20% just to say it's different. So I'm not really impressed. And keep in mind, I didn't know what any of this stuff looked like until I picked these little ships up. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Been wanting to do this one for a while. These are inexpensive, which is fun. And the cheapest one is the Resistance here, both because it's newest and it's kind of least desirable. The old school Y-Wing, you might have a little hard trouble finding, but they're out there and they're not too bad. The hardest one here by far is the Clone Wars Y-Wing, only because they made only 2 releases, and it was at the end of the line. And the titaniums from 2008, 2009, when they're ending, they're the hardest ones to find, just because that's kind of how it works. The last ones are usually the lower production numbers. But I needed it to complete my Republic fleet, so here it is. And it's Anakin's, so I can put it in my Anakin series. I really like the Y-Wing. It's a neat design. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.